Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I'll Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. And we're back with our SMNTY fiction, which, as a reminder, is a once-a-month thing that we do. Christina makes them amazing. It's ongoing. The story has been ongoing for quite a while now.
Mm-hmm.
We're in part 2 of a trilogy, the Terminus trilogy. This is technically called Big Things Start Small, but I didn't want to confuse people. But I like reminding you because I was fond of the name. And this is something that I wrote, I believe, in 2011. As part of National Novel Writing Month, is the sequel to the previous one I had written during 2010 National Novel Writing Month, which, by the way, is right when I got this job as an intern, 2010. And I don't edit them too much. I have to say I did edit this chapter a bit, just because I don't want to. It was intense. This chapter really goes up a notch in terms of what it's been. And I just didn't want to really disturb is too strong a word, but I didn't want people to be listening like, whoa, wait a minute. So I did edit this chapter a little bit. And this is the second part of the last chapter because my chapters are so long or too short. I never get it right. But yeah, I will admit I edited this one a little. That being said, content warning for violence, disease, threats of violence against children, death, which is the same that is always there, but I would say it's actually more explicit in this chapter. So, that being said, also, the recap, briefly, we've got this disease that's really killing off the human population, and it has to do with pregnancy, and there's the government and the religious organization that's controlling all aspects of getting pregnant and having children. Our main character, Tilda, has run away with her son, Madison, has been illegally on the run with her child, has met a bunch of people along the way, including a resistance that wasn't what she thought it would be, and then has found out that the leaders of ARM, the religious organization, are her son's grandparents. They're his paternal grandparents. And that they have basically made it impossible for anybody to get the vaccine that does exist. But they did give it to Madison. However, Tilda was able to escape with him and broadcast out on their system what they've done. And everybody's going to DC to fight. And Tilda and Madison are running in the opposite direction. And Madison is having these real questions of, wait, what does it mean? I could help people. Could I help other people make a vaccine? And Tilda's really wrestling with wanting to protect her son and not trusting anybody with the fact that, yeah, maybe. So they're having big conversations about that while they have nowhere really to go and they don't really have any supplies and bad weather's coming in. They're on the run from a mysterious man on the horse who they stole the horse. And the horse's name is Scout. And now they're making their way south, but it seems like something or someone is following them. So that is where we are. Let's get into it. At the sign that read Roanoke 8 miles, they could see it through the gaps left by the pines and leafless trees. It was nestled in a valley surrounded by purple mountains and rolling foothills. On one of these hills was a star composed of white metal and industrial lights captioned in large enough letters that they could read it once they approached the outskirts. World's largest man-made star. Now, why in the world would you want that? Bizarre. They veered away from Roanoke and its giant star, even though it pained Tilda to leave all of that civilization. But surely there were people who still inhabited the city that was close enough to be in the shadow of the capital, an electron in the first level of orbit around the nucleus. and people needed to be avoided until they put a much greater distance between them and DC. The road they were on tracked alongside the border of Roanoke, following a river on the outskirts that they could look across and see into buildings and houses, gas stations and schools. Tilda didn't see any signs of life, but if there were people living here, and there most likely were, they'd be nearer to town center in a more fortified location. At least, she hoped. She really didn't want to be seen passing by, much less on a horse. As the buildings became less dense, the road curved to the right, taking them in a more southwesterly direction, which suited Tilda. There were signs for bigger interstate highways, but Tilda ignored them. That's what the people journeying to the capital would take, at least those new to life on the road. They passed another town called Salem, which Tilda assumed to be the suburbs of Roanoke, with how close together they were, and then a couple of hours of nothing apart from a single gas station along the road, shuttered long before the onset of HSV 5. The river snaked back their way to be parallel with the road. Tilda kept an eye on the bank until she found a break in the steep, slippery mud and a slope that was easy to navigate, and guided Scout down it, allowing her to take a drink of slushy water, the entire time Tilda keeping an eye out for anything out of the ordinary. When Scout had finished, Tilda directed her back onto the asphalt, and they resumed their trek. Tilda looked up at the sky and couldn't help but think of that pocket watch ticking away in her pouch. She wondered what time it was. A large abandoned red train car in an empty field appeared on their left, across the river winding along the road next to them. Through the dense forest of trees on the other side, Tilda could make out what appeared to be a larger highway parallel to their smaller one, which made Tilda nervous. A couple of times they passed people, usually in small groups, that were seemingly too focused on their destination to take notice of Tilda and Madison. At one point, the two highways were so close together they could have easily cut over to the other road, but then they peeled apart again. After another hour or so, 460 led them into a small town called Lafayette. While it was tiny, its emptiness made it seem vast. The road took them right through the main square, past whitewashed antique shops, specialty stores, and petite restaurants, strings of traffic lights sagging between iron lampposts. Tilda considered their options. They could explore the houses for food, but that usually took a while, and she didn't want to spend a lot of time in one place, especially one still relatively close to people. It would take some time to leave the more populated eastern part of the country behind, though, and they weren't really in a position to not take a chance to find more supplies. A few blocks over to their left, Tilda spotted a decently sized grocery store called Big Al's in bright yellow letters. She navigated them to it, through blocks of empty stores and past one looming church of Gothic design, into the parking lot of Big Al's, hopping down onto concrete outside the glass doors, and helping Madison down as well. She fastened Scout's reins to a bike rack outside, telling Madison that they needed to be quick, and that he needed to stay close to her. The doors had been automatic, but without electricity, they failed to slide open when Tilda and Madison approached them. Instead, she pried them open, aggravatingly slowly, just enough for the two of them to slip through the gap. Big Al's was shaped like a large rectangle, much wider than it was long. Tilda went left down a row of shelves, checking both sides as they made their way past rotten produce and cheese and bread and bottles of wine. The entire back wall of the store was dedicated to frozen foods, so nothing useful there. The next aisle, snacks and cereals, yielded a couple of packages of Pop-Tarts, some raisins, snack bars, 100-calorie packs of cookies and chips, canned fruit, sun butter, dried banana chips, and some pumpkin seeds, which was more than they'd bagged at one place in a long time. Probably a place like this, off the main highway and with a tiny population. People had taken what they could carry, and that was it. The following few aisles, Tilda picked up some canned vegetables and beans, some more nuts, a couple of bottles of carbonated water and juice, and some disposable toothbrushes. Her pack heavier than ever, they checked behind the register, but all they found was an overturned register and some stamps. All right, let's go. She hoisted her pack further up her shoulders, the cans clanking together as they exited the store, Tilda having a more difficult time maneuvering through the gap between the sliding doors now that her pack was bigger. After wedging herself through and back outdoors, she blinked rapidly, adjusting to the light after the dim grocery store, and stopped short, hoping she was hallucinating. Madison bumped into her, and she felt him go still behind her. There were two men standing in the parking lot only a couple of yards away. Both of them were tall and large, wearing boots and jackets. One of them had a rifle slung over his back, a ball cap, and a graying beard. The other had a pistol and a holster attached to his belt, and brown hair and stubble on his face. "Fine-looking horse you got there," the man with the rifle called in what she could tell he thought was a non-threatening voice. Tilda didn't know what to say, so she just nodded, wondering if they'd been following them, waiting for them to dismount. She thought of the gun in her waistband, but there was no way to get to it without drawing attention, not to mention the obstacle presented by her now much heavier pack. "And look at that, a little boy," he continued in his gravelly tone. "He's yours, I reckon?" He gestured vaguely to the sores on her face. She nodded again, her eyes darting to the other man when he took a step closer. "Bit young, ain't you?" The question flirted the line of threatening. He was implying that he knew they must be on the run. Tilda said in the calmest voice she could muster, "I'm older than I look." That drew a grating chuckle out of the man. His partner inched closer, and Tilda fought the urge to inch back. "What are you two doing out here by yourselves?" Tilda deemed not to answer, turning to look outright at the man that was advancing on them. She wondered if giving them Scout would be enough for them, but she doubted it. "Don't worry, we're not going to hurt you," the man with the rifle said, drawing her attention back to him. "Let's introduce ourselves. I'm Ellis, and this is Jake. We've got a bit of a proposition for you." Tilda waited, preparing a bluff in her head about how they had a big group to get back to, but she wanted to see how much these two men knew about her and Madison before she tried to pull it off. Ellis's next words rendered that plan inert. "We've been following you for a while now." At the look on her face, he raised his hands, jostling the rifle hanging by the strap on his shoulder a little bit, and backpedaled. "Nothing creepy, we just wanted to get a sense of what kind of people you are. And the way you take care of that boy and that horse," he pointed to each in turn. "Especially when I know you must not have much in the way of supplies." He gestured to Big Al's behind them. "Well, we can tell you're good folks, and we'd like to offer you a place to stay." Bile rose in Tilda's throat, her heart twisted uncomfortably. "We got a place, not too far from here. It used to be a campground for kids to go around and learn to build fires and tie knots, but we've turned it into a little village. We grow our own food, we have some livestock, everyone's got a house. It's a nice little place." He looked at Madison. "It'd be a nice little place to grow up." Madison shifted further behind Tilda. "And it's safe, too," Ellis assured Tilda. "Pretty well off the highways. We got a fence all around. We've never had a problem with enforcers or marauders." Tilda highly suspected they were part of a group of marauders. "We don't offer this lightly. We're a tight-knit group. We take care of each other, like family. And we're offering you a chance to be part of that." In what she hoped was a nonchalant way, she sidled over to Scout's reins and undid the knot in one quick motion. Jake took several steps closer to them, his hand hovering over his pistol. Tilda snapped her gaze up as Scout stamped nervously. A gunshot would scare her off. Ellis shot Jake a look. Tilda said in a voice with minimal quaver, "We appreciate the offer, but we're not interested." Ellis gave her a toothy smile, a predator's smile parading as something harmless. "Why not? The cold months are upon us. It would surely be safer for you, for your son. We have plenty of women. We get along just fine. You'll fit right in." Tilda fought back a shudder at the phrasing. Jake hovered near, hawk-eyed, ready to draw his weapon. "We're not interested?" Tilda repeated firmly. "We're meeting up with some people." Ellis's eyes darkened. "There aren't any more people," he practically spat out. "You ain't meeting up with no one." Jake took another step forward. "We got a real nice setup, real nice," Ellis told her, his breath hard and steely. "But we don't have any kids. We don't have enough people." Tilda's breath quickened. If we're going to survive past this generation, if we want what we've built to continue, and we do, he assured her darkly, we need more people. People like your son. People who weren't infected with HSV-5. Tilda felt dizzy. Madison clutched at her pack behind her. Ellis switched tracks once again, reiterating kindly, we'll take care of you. You'll be happy and safe. Thinking quickly, Tilda volleyed back, you say enforcers have never been a problem. Ellis agreed, clearly thinking he'd almost won her over. Who do you think we're running from? If you take us to your camp, the enforcers will find you, believe me. Ellis shook his head with his too wide smile marred with blackened teeth. I don't believe you. You said yourself I looked too young to have a child, she pointed out, her eyes darting back and forth between Ellis and Jake. Well, guess what? You're correct. They are looking for us, and they will not stop. Ellis clearly didn't buy it. He said unconcernedly, that's a risk we'll have to take, I guess. Been a long time since we've seen a kid out here. He watched Tilda for a minute, keeping his gaze on her as he informed her. Now Jake here is going to take your horse. He slung his rifle off his shoulder and into his hands, aiming it at them. And the two of you are going to walk in front of me, nice and slow. Sound good? Is this how you treat family? Tilda asked derisively before she could stop herself. But Ellis just smiled at her insolence. When they misbehave. He indicated with the barrel of his gun for them to step forward as Jake grabbed Scout's reins. Let's get a move on. Daylight is wasting. There's nothing out there for you. Trust me. You'll be happier with us. Tilda barely heard him, her mind whirring with possible escape plans. Ellis chuckled, apparently taking glee in seeing her reduced to a helpless, powerless state. She took slow steps closer to Ellis, stalling her approach to him until a plan would hopefully fall into place. Madison gripped her jacket tightly. "Aw, let me see the lad," Ellis cooed in an awkward and creepy way that made Tilda wonder if he'd ever seen a child in real life. Possibly he hadn't. Tilda halted a mere foot or so away, unsure of what Ellis wanted her to do. "Come out. Let me get a look at you." Madison did not move, instead huddling closer behind her. Something pushed her forward and she choked, surprised, almost losing her footing. Madison screamed and Tilda spun so quickly her spine cracked. Jake had Madison by the arms and was lifting him off the ground, holding him like he would a plank of wood, moving him from out behind the safety of Tilda. Scout watched, stamping her foot. Tilda didn't think. She just reacted. Lightning fast, her hand was in her jeans pocket and lashed around her hunting knife, the one she dishonestly promised herself she intended to use only for hunting. She flipped out the blade and lunged forward, bearing it into Jake's back. It was harder than she thought. It pierced the skin easily, but then it took some muscle to push it past bones, scraping. Jake jerked as though shocked by an electric wire, a throaty gasp escaping his lips. Madison fell to his butt on the concrete and immediately began crab-crawling away, his eyes wide in horror. "Jake!" Ellis called out as the man collapsed to his knees, Tilda barely managing to keep a hold of her knife as it tore out of his skin. The body that had been blocking Tilda's view of Ellis fell from view, revealing the stark, gaunt face of the grief-stricken man as he stared down at the body of Jake, who was still alive, twitching and gasping. Ellis's face quickly morphed from one of grief to one of rage, and Tilda ran at him as he raised the barrel of his rifle, tackling him to the hard concrete before he could take aim. He shouted in surprise, losing his grip on his weapon. It clattered to the pavement, and Tilda's grip almost dropped on her knife, but she readjusted and prepared to drive it into Ellis's chest, but he caught her wrist, dark eyes swirling with insane rage. Tilda struggled against him, but his hold around her wrist tightened painfully, forcing her to release her knife. It dropped dully to the pavement. With a cry of rage, he grabbed her hair and yanked it to the side, causing her to cry out in pain. He used the momentum of her body, jerking to the side, to flip her over onto her back and effectively reverse their positions so that she was pressed into the cold asphalt as he was straddling her waist with bruising force. She flailed her legs and hit at his face, but he captured her other wrist, locking it in one hand. Tilda struggled wildly, thinking of Madison and what they would do to him. Stupid bitch, Ellis spat out, closing his free hand around her throat. We would have accepted you. We would have treated you like one of our own. Spots danced in front of her eyes as she gasped fruitlessly for oxygen. He removed his hand from her throat and hit her soundly in the face with a resounding smack. Tilda drew in a tortured breath, not having time to think anything coherent before she was hit again and again. I'm going to make you suffer, Ellis promised. I'm going to make you beg. The pressure lessened suddenly, and Ellis shouted, falling forward on top of her. Madison stood over him, gasping heavily, his face stark with terror, the blue handle of the pocket knife she'd given him earlier that day sticking out from Ellis's lower back. For a moment, Ellis was reduced to a primal animal sound as Tilda worked to shove him off, but he was a dead weight. Despite this, and desperate, she kneed him in the side and he gasped, falling off of her. Her hand darted around the asphalt like a spider until she brushed it against the cold steel of the blade, and she closed her fingers around the handle. Ellis coughing, rolling back up to his knees and lunging forward towards Tilda again. She rammed her blade upward, burying it in his side. Ellis choked again, blood dribbling out of his mouth, the warm red liquid pooling in the valley of Tilda's neck. She wrinkled her face in disgust and shoved him off of her. He landed heavily on his back, arching off the pavement with an airy streak when the contact buried the small knife Madison had planted between his kidneys even deeper into his flesh. He flopped to his other side, curling in, and Tilda coughed, rough, one hand at her throat. She pushed herself up, her throat burning as she drew in wild breaths. The asphalt pressed into her knees as the world grayed in and out around her, choking as she regained life-giving oxygen while Ellis choked as life left him. Madison was on his knees at her side, watching Ellis and Jake alternately, his eyes dancing with fear. Tilda's gloves were wet with blood. Her fingers twitched. She turned her head to watch Ellis's back, the heaving of her chest easing, her vision clearing. She couldn't tear her eyes from the rapid and uneven rise and fall of Ellis's back, frozen in indecision. Blood erupted out of his wound with every pump of his heart, the beating growing more and more erratic and far apart. The knife she'd shoved into his side taunted her. Should she pull it out and stab him again just to be on the safe side? To speed up the process and grant him some form of mercy? She couldn't use the gun for fear of startling Scout. She half glanced behind her and immediately jerked her head away when she caught the blank, dead, condemning gaze of Jake, but she could still feel his empty eyes boring into her. Ellis was muttering something incoherent under his breath. If he was right, and they were from a village not far from here, pretty soon someone would come looking for Ellis and Jake and find them dead. There was no way she and Madison could cover this up. They'd be out for revenge. With jittery hands, she shakily grabbed the handle of her knife. Ellis shuddered, crying out. Madison whimpered. She pushed the blade back into its housing, promising to clean it later, and pulled out Madison's pocket knife. No reaction from Ellis. She retracted it and passed it back to him. He took it mostly out of reflex, shock the only emotion registering on his face, his eyes still glued to Ellis, who had gone quite still. She picked up Ellis's rifle and shouldered it, too afraid to search through his pockets for anything else. She pulled Madison to his feet, words stuck behind clenched teeth. She stooped to pick up Jake's handgun and stowed it in her packed side pocket. Scout shuffled anxiously as she approached, and Tilda held out her hands. The horse steadied, and she practically threw Madison on the saddle and climbed up hastily after him, barely seated before she snapped the reins, goading Scout out of Big Al's parking lot and back onto the highway, pushing Scout to a slow gallop. And that brings us to the end of this chapter. I hope everyone's okay. Also, I apologize for the Southern accent that I did. It's such a trope. And I had to grapple with this when I was editing over it. I was like, this is such the trope of kind of the creepy Southern backwoods man that's appearing and is trying to, quote, help you,
Right.
but definitely is not. And yeah, this was a rough chapter in terms of Madison as a child having to attack someone, try to kill someone to save his mom. It was just really intense. And I think this is almost every apocalypse thing has this moment of, the child loses their innocence in some way.
Mm-hmm.
And the fallout of that is going to come. Because in the first one, it was he saw Tilda kill someone.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's been involved. And so that is definitely going to be dealt with. Also, again, the names, I'm telling you, when I read this, I'm like, I know exactly who I was talking about. And I am somebody who looks up like meanings of names and things like that. But yeah, I hope that this met the hype that I was building up, and or you're just okay and not too stressed out by it. Because it was kind of intense. But I also hope that you're enjoying this, because we do love doing this. Christina makes them amazing. And if there's any suggestions in this realm of something we could do like this, please let us know. You can email us at stephanie@momstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter at momstuffpodcast, or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff Mom Never Told You. We also have a YouTube page, if you prefer it like that. We have a TeePublic, and we have a book you can get wherever you get your books. Thanks as always to our super producer Christina, our executive producer Maya, and our contributor Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff Mom Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.